up today on Uncommon Sense. Join me as I interview Carrie Gress, author of 10 books and fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Hello, and welcome to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. I am Grettelyn, your host, and I am so happy to be joined today by Carrie Gress. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to be here.
Great. Well, I have been highly influenced by some of your books. I have to say the feminism ones probably changed my life. It's not something you can say about a lot of books, but definitely for me. But why don't you, if you don't mind, give our listeners a little bit of an introduction to yourself, just in case they've never heard of you before.
Yeah. So I have written 10 books. I finished a PhD in philosophy about 10 years ago. And after I finished that dissertation, I thought I can write books. So I have obviously continued doing that. It works really well. I'm a homeschooling mom of 5 children, and I don't homeschool all of them anymore. But it's writing has been one of those things that has worked in really well with our family and family's needs and all those kinds of things. So I just keep doing it. And so, yeah, at this point, I'm obviously doing a lot more than writing. I'm doing a fair amount of speaking and promoting the books. I mean, I think that's the big secret about writing is you're not just a writer. You have to actually go out and talk about the books if you actually want them to have any traction. So in any event, I initially started my PhDs in philosophy, and I went to Catholic University and did a lot on medieval philosophy in particular. And then I've always been really interested in culture as well. And so I think if you had to come up with a theme of my books other than Catholicism, it's certainly the question of culture and how it is that we improve culture and really restore our civilization to something that, pulling it back from the brink of all this decadence that we're living with. So anyway, my latest book is The End of Woman. And this is my first really secular book. Regnery Press published it. And it was just a way to help women really understand the lies that we have been sold about feminism. And, they're very deep and they're very trenchant and they're very hidden. And so this has been the effort to try and help us understand really what motherhood is again, getting back to this common sense model of, recognizing that women are truly meant to be mothers, not just biologically, but also psychologically and spiritual as well. And this has obviously been long forgotten. So in a lot of ways, I feel a little bit like St. John, the voice out in the wilderness, but we're making some inroads. It's been really exciting and really amazing to hear from the women whose lives are being changed by this, because I think once people start seeing, the lies that we're being fed, then suddenly it's very easy to start seeing something different. And I think that's, obviously very encouraging and heartening for not just present women, but for future women, for our daughters and certainly our sons as well, who are dramatically affected by the lies of feminism too.
Amen. And it's definitely changed too how I'm thinking about raising my daughters. My daughters are very young, so it's nice to have encountered this early. But just, even just coming at womanhood and motherhood from the perspective of this is something good, this is something beautiful, and not just focusing on, it's easy to complain, right? I think that's
so easy. Yeah.
It's so easy. And it's sort of a pitfall that I think women are particularly prone to as well. It's sort of like a bonding point. We complain to bond, and it's kind of silly. But I just did it with you before we started the podcast. But
there's a difference between complaining and just telling someone what the reality is. So yeah.
True. But even just, trying to go forward with my daughters and thinking about, how am I going to help them through their transition into womanhood and let them know that, it's not this horrible thing to be a woman. It's a wonderful thing to be a woman. Yeah. But just to give our listeners a little bit of a background, I read your book, The End of Woman, and it's sort of an expose of what feminism is and was from the very beginning. And it's kind of terrifying and eye-opening. Yeah. But I just started your book, The Marian Option, which is sort of the antidote book. And that's where I found that you were a Chestertonian, and I was very happy because it gave me an excuse to ask you to come on the podcast.
Right.
But yeah, so tell us a little bit about Chesterton in your life and how that's influenced you, and especially from this sort of Marian female point of view.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think Chesterton feels like sort of, home base. Like you can always just rely on Chesterton to give you some really amazing quotes and sense of reality. And I'm trying to remember exactly. I've used Chesterton in all of my books. I think it feels like there's just so many gems, especially our Theology of Home series that I did with Noel Mehring. We have peppered that as well as our blog. We post a quote every day on our blog, 5 days a week. And Chesterton is obviously a repeat poster. There's just always so much wisdom that comes from him, but it's always, I love that dash of fun in it, and the sort of the unexpected that comes about in it. So in any event, the Anti-Mary Exposed was the first book that I wrote, and it was really, looking at what's happened with the culture. How do we get to this place? And I didn't, it was one of these things. I wrote a chapter in my book called the Marian Option about this. Are we in the age of Mary or the age of the anti-Mary? And from there, the publisher Tan Books asked me to do another book on just that topic. And, I agreed to do it. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? I hope there's enough research. And there was more than enough research. It was just abundant to really start seeing that there's something wrong with the culture, and how the culture isn't just like shifted away from sort of Marian values, but is just diametrically opposed to them, really the opposite of it. And so that was really what I wanted to do with that book, was first show how the anti-Mary, how that exists, and all these connections to the occult and whatnot. And I only went back to the 1960s in that book. And then the second half of the book, I didn't want to leave people feeling like the whole world is doom and gloom, and this is there's no hope. And so that was really the fun part of diving into the Marian elements of it, and really starting to look at what I guess you could just say the beautiful truths and realities that we can get from her. And I think so much is trying to sort of sort through what is, who is Our Lady, not just as a statue, or not just as a saccharine representation, or not just words we repeat in the rosary, which all those things are important, but to sort of get down to the heart of who she was, and get to know her as a real person, and have her inspire us, and also mother us, that real relationship with her. So in any event, that was really, I think, what I tried to do with that book. And then the End of Woman just ended up coming out of that. I had so many people that were Catholic say, can you please write a book that I can give to my Protestant relatives, or you can give to someone who is an atheist, to help them understand, this ancient wisdom, which of course, Chesterton taps into this, this depth of Marian, Mariology, really. And so I needed to write a new book. I couldn't just take out the Marian parts. It had to be something totally different, obviously for copyright reasons, but also just because it needed to be a different book. And it was in that book that I went back to first wave feminism. And, I initially thought, I'll do just a couple of days of research on the first wave feminists and just get some good quotes and, move along. And I ended up spending months and months among them, and really realizing that the problems that are part and parcel of feminism started from the very beginning, and they're all very, very deeply anti-Catholic. And so that's really kind of just what has led to this adventure of realizing the whole movement is a problem, and trying to help all of us, rethink of it in ways that are rich and compelling, and building on the wisdom that we have, instead of just getting stuck in this sort of whirlpool of bad ideas that we keep trying to redeem, that are just irredeemable.
Yeah, that's well said. I think that is a problem, that we sort of really, really want to keep some of these things in the culture that are just toxic and should be, flushed out. And I think that's something that Chesterton was really good at too, is pointing out these things and saying, but actually we don't want eugenics.
Yeah.
Actually, we
Yeah.
don't want this, you know. Um,
Mhm.
so it's nice to see that sort of perspective, and that sort of, it's like a wake up call, really, when you look
Mhm.
at what actually feminism was built on, which is what you show very well in both of those books. Um, it's disturbing, and it's not a happy, healthy picture, and it's
Mhm.
pretty clearly, as you say, moved by a spirit that is not of the Holy Spirit, let's say.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and it is kind of in Mary that we find the antidote for that,
Mhm.
and in this common sense that, again, Chesterton was so good at pointing out. But
Yeah.
these things that we feel as women so intensely, and I think there's this sort of hopeful movement of some younger women sort of starting to discover this. They're like, I want a family. I don't want to,
Mhm.
you know.
Right. Right.
It's like,
Right.
yes, surprise, you do.
Yeah.
You know, it's these sort of fundamental things that people have forgotten that they want, and that
Mhm.
they were made for, really. It's more than even just wanting, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
No, and I think that's an incredible point. I mean, this is one of the very hopeful things is just seeing how many young women just are not impressed or interested in feminism at all.
Mm,
You know, they just really see it as something from their mothers or their grandmothers, and I think that we're seeing a lot of the heartache from it as well. A lot of women are starting to speak up about it, and you know, the all the sort of gloss and savviness that has been applied to feminism for the last 50 years sort of wearing out and wearing off because people are realizing, you know, that feminist dream that I had when I was in my 20s isn't really panning out the way that I wanted it to now that I'm in my 60, 50, 60, 70s.
mhm.
And it's that kind of isolation and, you know, the depression, all those kinds of elements that you know, are just incredibly tragic. And I think a lot of women are sorting through that now. And gratefully, like, you know, we've pointed out, it's just younger women are saying, this is a little bit silly. Like, why would I want to work 80 hours a week for a career that then I just go home to a very, you know, expensive
Empty.
apartment? But yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, you know, there's one woman in particular whom I met that she, you know, she had this amazing career and I think she got sick and had to quit her job. And, you
Mm,
know, within 2 weeks, she was completely replaced. And, you know, this family that she thought, these people at her office that she thought were her family were
yeah.
nowhere to be seen. It was just things had just moved on the way that they do in the corporate structure. So it's these kinds of things that I think women have a much deeper heart for and a desire to um, you know, use those elements of their heart, that compassion, their capacity to be very relational, to be focused on others, to be able to anticipate the needs of others before they even know they need them. You know, I mean, these are all very Marian concepts that I talk about in my books, certainly the first book, but I think these are really important pieces. But on the flip side of that, and this is really why feminism has had such a foothold, is the fact that women are very manipulatable on an emotional level.
Mhm.
And I've written an article about this called "The Gospel of Discontent." You can see
Mm,
as early as the 1890s, the socialists realized we've got to start stirring up these mothers because they're the ones that are the heart of the family, and we want to get rid of the family and
mm,
make everything very egalitarian. And so they've really focused on, actually, it's not coincidentally, it was first published in this magazine, the socialist newspaper, I think, called Lucifer, which
mm.
they later changed to a different title.
A little too
But, you know,
obvious.
that tells you something about what was really going on.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you get to the Soviets in the 1900s, and they initially, the Soviets and feminists were really at odds with one another,
Mm,
and the Soviets thought the feminists were just way too bourgeois and didn't want anything to do with them. Well, then they realized they had all these women who were professors and um, you know, professionals and educated and uh, high class women who were really angry and bitter and resentful in their lives and agitating for feminism. And suddenly, the woman, the Soviet woman who was in charge of all the women's issues, who actually founded the International Day of Women,
mm,
I think it was in like 1920s. I can't remember exactly the exact year. She was like, "Wait a minute, these women can work for us. We can
mm,
manipulate these emotions. We can really capitalize off this resentment that they have, and turn them into this, you know, great battalion of Marxists that will help the revolution. And that's, you can see that throughout, the whole of the 1900s is this effort to try and make feminism more and more Marxist. And that's exactly what they were successful in doing until, you get to the second wave and it's all Marxism. And, of course, we just had no idea. We were sort of told it's this very benevolent thing that's, given us work and jobs and opportunities, and yet not really seeing that dark underbelly, which is trying to manipulate us on a very emotional level. And, so many, I know I grew up just with that sort of reaction, like, you don't tell me I can't do this because I'm a
Right.
girl.
Yeah.
It's just that immediate, spring into action, I'm going to show you kind of attitude. And that's exactly what they're trying to get, that as well as that feeling, that fear of missing out, which, we women are prone to. Back to Eve. I mean, this is what the fruit in the garden was all about, was, there's more that you don't have, Eve. And so she took the bait, and we have been doing the exact same thing for at least the last 100 years.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, now women are waking up and seeing that the thing that they thought they were missing out on is not that exciting or fulfilling.
Yeah. Right.
And
Exactly.
yeah, and it's sad. I mean, there's actually there's a lot of women on TikTok who are like my age, and they're getting towards 40, and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, I have no husband, I have no children.
Yeah.
I'm going to be alone, and my biological clock is running out, and what am I going to do?"
Yeah.
And it's just it's very sad. Like, it's good that they're figuring it out, but it's like, it's late. You know what I mean? Like, it's sad.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's
and
incredibly sad. And
yeah,
that's not
and
an
yeah.
accident. I mean, that's the whole goal. And you can see really, the way the devil plays into this, because especially for women who have had abortions, you can see, he's both the tempter as well as the accuser. So, if a woman has had an abortion, or if she has done things to prevent relationships in her life, you can then see, this early stage of temptation, but then the latter stage of accusation, where, women really get stymied in the kind of guilt, and they get locked into that sense of guilt. And, I mean, that's obviously the beauty of the Catholic faith, is confession and being able to move on from that and still build from there. But you can imagine that there are a lot of women in the culture who don't have any kind of faith to fall back on, and they just get stuck in that
Mm,
place of guilt and frustration and kind of depression. And so it's not
mm,
a surprise that we're seeing a lot of women who are medicated because
yeah.
of these realities that have been foisted on us.
And it's that's something that we have that's so beautiful in the Catholic Church. So
Mhm.
we have Mary, who it can be a little intimidating, I think, because
Mhm.
she's literally the perfect woman. But
Exactly.
if you look at every apparition that's ever happened that's approved by the church, she's always like inviting us to come back and inviting us
Mhm.
to turn. And it's this very motherly, like, it's not like flaunting her perfection as, the ultimate girl boss or
Right.
whatever. Like, that's not what she
Right.
is. She's,
No.
she's,
Right.
yeah, she's standing there as a mother inviting us back. And there's her model. And if you can't relate to that right away, we have all these saints that are, that
Yeah.
were, some of them were sinners, and well, they were all sinners, but some of them were very bad
Egregious.
sinners.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's relatability there.
Yeah.
Um, that I think
And
we need to
an
tap into.
incredible amount of diversity too, in terms of the different callings and the way in which women have used their gifts and put them made themselves available for what was needed at the time in which they lived. And I think that's the beautiful element that the church offers through this 2,000 years of women saints, and through Our Lady, of course, but just these different ways in which this can be, our maternal aspects and desire to love and help others can be instantiated through so many different means, whether it's, like I said, the spiritual element of women religious, someone like Saint Teresa of Avila, and then of
Mm,
course the much more maternal side of someone like Gianna Molla.
mm,
It's just incredible to start paying attention and seeing the commonalities, and yet the very different ways in which God's called each of them.
mm. Yeah, even I mean, even Saint Joan of Arc, who we think of as this
Yeah.
sort of like very manly, but she
Mhm.
was very motherly to her troops, and
Right. Right.
she wouldn't let them swear. Like she was very, she was sort of
Right.
very much like this is how you're going to behave, boys. And, you know, it's just this
Mhm.
sort of beauty. There's never a denial of the womanhood in the saints that we
Mhm.
see, and that's
Mhm.
just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And you know, just try to turn it a little bit towards Chesterton because that's what we're supposed to do. And we love him. But just, you know, he had such a great sense of, I think, what women were supposed to be, and sort
Mhm.
of that showed in his sort of gentle kind of poking at some of the feminist. He has that great quote that women said they would not be dictated to, and then they all went and became typists.
Yeah. Oh,
You
so
know,
good. So good. It's so good.
hilarious. Yeah, and it's sort of the reality of like,
Mhm.
you know, what are you living for? Are
Mhm.
you, and Chesterton has, I don't know where it's from, but he has a wonderful whole, it might have been in the Superstition of Divorce, but he's got a whole section on this where he talks about what women are for and what their natural gifts are and what we're naturally inclined toward, and we can kind of give that in, we're going to give that in service to somebody.
Mm.
So do we give it to like a blind corporation that's just going to kind of eat us up?
Yeah.
Or do we give it to a family where we have a really good chance of being loved and giving love and doing something that's lasting and important and is going to change the world in a much bigger way than even if, like, you know, you were a scientist and you discovered the cure for a disease, or like, it's not the
Mhm.
same as forming a soul, and
Yeah.
helping them get to heaven.
Yeah. No,
So,
very different. And I think that's really the linchpin is this idea, I mean, similar to that a concept that we're meant to worship something, but we're also meant to serve something. And obviously, it's great when they're connected. The family is
mm,
obviously so deeply rooted in our understanding of the faith and the way in which God has ordered society. And so I think that's just of that vital piece, and especially recognizing the immortality of the soul versus the ephemeralness of a lot of the work that we're doing, that you don't actually see fruit of it. And I think this is,
mm,
this is one of the pieces that I think is such an important element of the female heart is we want to see the fruit of our works. We want to be doing something good. We want to be cultivating something. And you can see that in obviously things like gardening and whatnot, but that's all of those are sort of, play a role in nurturing the souls around us, whether we're mentoring them, whether we're leading them spiritually, or whether we're mothering them and doing all three. And you can even hear that on the flip side of that. I know there's a lot of young women now, and I know I felt this for a long time, was just, why is it so hard to find a mentor? A
mm,
woman that you can trust, that you really feel like can lead you in an ordered way to come to understand and know yourself better, but also help you navigate pitfalls and all of that. It feels like the mentoring that we get is be ambitious and outspoken and
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
go for that job and compete with the men, and where are the other voices? So
mm,
yeah, I think that's one of the really important pieces is trying to start building back into the culture these alternate voices. And I do this in my, certainly in the anti-Mare Exposed, where the second half of the book is really related to Our Lady and the way she
mm,
can be a model for us. But I think that even having a more concrete sense of how this ought to look is really, really important. And this is not something um, that Catholics have done well. I think this is there's a real gap in trying to model what healthy womanhood looks like. And
mm,
this is where we need to bring back some more Chesterton, but also this is the goal of theology of home and why we have images in it, because this is how the left has destroyed us, is through images and through
mm,
selling us something, selling us leftist ideas through really beautiful and compelling pieces, whether it's in magazines, it's fashion, it's Hollywood, it's daytime TV. That's really what has been our downfall. And here we keep coming back with just arguments. Those are great and important, but they're not going to actually fill, that idea of the moral imagination. We're not giving people intellectual hooks to start understanding what the culture really can look like. And I think this is just a vital piece of something that we have to get back much more involved in, because not only has the left put a stake in what their vision of womanhood has looked like. But they also have done an amazing job of making the opposition, those of us who don't think feminism is the be all end all, they just get the women in the red robes and the red
Yeah.
bonnets, the Handmaid's Tale women, and that's their avatar for who we are. Is we're passive. We're going to join a cult. We're going to be um, kind of fertility robots. I mean, it's just the whole thing is so distorted. But they've done a masterful job of really creating the opposition in people's minds. And so, this has really been the goal of our work at Theology of Home, and of course in my books, to just expose these lies, but also just try and supply something richer and more compelling than what's currently available.
I love that. And I love that, I just got the Theology of Home for Mother's Day.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
yes,
The first
it
one?
was the first
Or the
one.
okay.
Yes. And I'm loving it. And of course, the first thing I did was open it up and just look at the pictures because the,
Mhm.
it's great. It's like everything you want a magazine to be.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
warm, happy, beautiful pictures. And
Yes.
it's easy to look at my own messy house and be like, man, I'm never going to get there. But
Mhm.
but it's so important to have those aspirational images. Like you said, it's like a little bit of mentorship,
Mhm.
because you can sort of struggle towards some of those things and do
Mhm.
a few of them in your own house, even if maybe you can't get to the whole picture right away.
Yeah.
But there is sort of a beauty in having. Chesterton says this a lot, in having an ideal to shoot for, even if
Yeah.
it's so far beyond the reality.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
don't, then you're just going to end up with worse than the reality because you're shooting for like not that great.
Anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Movie.
Um, yeah, you
Yeah,
can't,
and
yeah.
I think that's, just a really great point. We got a lot of pushback saying, the pictures are too beautiful, they're too aspirational, and it just struck me as really funny because it was like, would you ever go to a checkout stand at the grocery store and say, "Oh, I can't buy that. Those pictures are too beautiful." I mean, and obviously there's all kinds of problems with those magazines, and they're airbrushed, and they're obviously the messaging is horrible, but
Mm,
that's sort of the point. Like, why don't we have a single magazine at the checkout? There's 35 million Catholic women in the United States. That's
mhm.
almost the population of Canada. We don't have a single glossy, beautiful magazine that's well done, that's compelling, that can be read by everyone. And I would love to make something like that someday. I mean, this is what Theology of Home is, sort of the poor woman's magazine, because
Mhm.
between our books and our blog is trying to really get this messaging out, but not having a budget to,
Yeah.
multi-million dollar budget to do it in the way that we would love to do it. But it's really important. And I think that, for me, I know when I had 4 small children, 5 and under,
Mm.
my mother-in-law had gotten me a subscription to a magazine. It was sort of like if I could get everybody sort of settled for a few minutes, I would just steal away for 10 or 15 minutes and just flip through it, because
Yeah.
not only is it aspirational, but it sort of gives you ideas. It sort of takes
Mm.
you to a different place. Like, there's something that transports you, that you can start seeing your own reality slightly different, like you mentioned, sort of take those little tips and have an ideal. But there's also, a lot of images that are just not going to be in any way my reality, but it's still fun to
Right.
think about. And then maybe reimagine life in different ways. And I think that's important too. Traveling was definitely off our calendar for many, many years, and but it was always still fun to see different places, or places that I had been photographed, or places that I'd love to go. So I think these are really important pieces for especially women um, to have something that it's almost it's sort of like just intellectual inspiration that kind of gets the creative juices flowing in different ways. And I know for me, it made me feel a lot less alone. Like, I just felt like there
Yeah.
was something into which there was a bigger part than just these 4 walls and raising these children and the routine that we were in. That there was some kind of way to sort of break out of it, even if it was just for 10 minutes.
Mm.
But that going back into it, it was easier for me to sort of feel supported and creative, and something had opened up in a different way from just those 10 minutes. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it's not surprising if you look at how popular magazines have been, how long they have existed. And
Mhm.
it's a certain there's something very specifically feminine about it, being able to flip through pages and have your mind taken to these different things. It's not it's not a book. You don't have the same
Yeah.
theme. There could be a general theme, but oftentimes you're just getting a whole bunch of things. And, how much do we love doing that too? Like our conversations jumping from one topic to the other.
Yeah.
I know when I got married, I had to like start warning my husband, like, I am changing topics right now.
I know.
Because
Yeah. I'm still
trying
there.
to trying to fit back in, what I was adding that
Yeah.
was new with what I had just been talking about, and like these are not connected. So,
Yeah. I think like 7 years in, he was like, "You're just gonna go wherever you want to go." I'm like, "Yeah, sorry."
yes, that's how it works. Welcome to
Yeah.
the female mind. So that's
Yes.
good that he figured it out. But yeah,
Yeah. I was like, it does connect in here. Like,
it's somehow related. Yeah,
it's somehow
but but
related.
but I think that's the important thing is recognizing this is the way the female brain and mind
Hmm.
works, and rather than fighting it and trying to get women to absorb content the way we think they should absorb it. And I say this as a woman with a PhD in philosophy. Like I thought for
Hmm.
years that this is what I was going to do, was just make these lovely, very logical arguments, and everyone was just going to, be transformed by them. And of course, very quickly I learned that was just not the way to do it. And so this has been kind of the response is like, okay, well, what does work? What does help transform the minds of women? And I think it's really important to have these pieces of um, beauty and richness and compelling content, but also some fun, something that feels fresh and inspiring. I think is really important too.
Yeah. And if for women who don't have that mentor, like you said, it is hard to find that mentor. It's sort of like a little moment of mentorship that you can,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we love our Pinterest. We love, we have all these things that
yep.
we do this with. Why not
Mhm.
find it in a place that's like for us as Catholic women or as Christian women, trying to find this, trying to find what God made us for.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I was lucky, and here again, Chesterton. So I think there's a lot of women in the Chesterton movement. We're kind of sort of in the background. You think of Chesterton, you think of, the picture of Laura Horn with like three pipes coming out of her mouth.
Right. Yep.
um, but the reality is that there are a lot of women in this movement, and a lot of them are very motherly and are very, they're all different. Some of them are very, sort of strong and choleric, and there's people like me who are sort of quiet and phlegmatic.
Mhm.
But we have, there's all these beautiful women, and I was, the leader of my local Chesterton society is a woman, and she kind of took me under her wing and started inviting me to her house, and I would come over and help her make dinner and things. And
Mhm.
I married her son eventually, but
Uh,
that's beside the
that
point.
worked out well.
It
That's
was very well. It was
right.
wonderful, but like
Right.
it was this place that I could. She just sort of started mentoring me in this beautiful way,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
like you said, we don't do that well, I think, as a church.
Mhm.
But I do wonder if that's partly because there's so few religious women around today.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but
Well, oh, go ahead.
no, just I think there are places in the church where we do that well. And it's just,
Mhm.
shameless plug, but I think the Chesterton Society, surprisingly, is one of those places. It seems like a
That's
very
great
male
to hear.
place, but it's not.
Mhm.
There's a lot of good female influence, but there are sort of these like niche places where women are sort of in the background helping
Mhm.
other women in the church, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really the heart of it is there is this sense of the kind of the women that rule the country are very choleric and outspoken, and
Hmm.
we obviously need those gifts, but what gets drowned out are the quieter voices. And I think there's something incredibly important about being a mentor. And a lot of women who are older, that are empty nesters and whatnot, to ask me, well, what can I be doing? And I think there's so much to be said for just exactly what now your mother-in-law did, which was invite you over and just let you experience real daily life with a family. And
Hmm.
I know there was a family that took me in that way when I was a graduate student. And I grew up in very secular Oregon, and I didn't know anything about raising children or even homeschooling, or these were the things that I wanted, but I had no idea how it looked on a daily basis. And so it was just this incredible blessing to be able to be around a family, and there were many generations of the family that all sort of live close to each other, and just see
Hmm.
the dynamics of the rituals that they did and the ways that they celebrated births and celebrated birthdays and celebrated deaths, and all of these important things. It was just, such a gift for me to be able to absorb that in a very, this very intensely Catholic cultural family, giving me new ways to think about those things. So that I'm always encouraging women, do something really simple. Like if you're good at baking something, invite a young woman over if she wants to learn how to bake, these kinds of things. Cause I know I was not a good cook. There's just always so
Yeah.
much to learn, and those kinds of traditions. It doesn't have to be some big thing, or even just over for dinner, book clubs, all those kinds of things. There are different ways in which multi-generational, meetings can happen so that mentoring happens. And even my faith came largely from a rosary group of women that were my
Mm.
mom's age, that they invited me to join them when I was in college. And that's really where I learned about St. Louis de Montfort's Marian consecration, all these things that I certainly had been prepared for as, in my Catholic education. So anyway, I think there's a lot, it doesn't have to, we don't have to be doing these big events or big things. It has to just, one soul at a time
Mm.
can really make these changes where we start focusing on the details and really enriching our lives through learning them and making them our own, that are passed down to us from other amazing women.
Yeah, and that's a place where we can learn from Chesterton's life. We think a lot about his writings,
Mm-hmm.
and they're of course very wonderful. But him and his wife had no children, but they sort of made their home a place of hospitality, and they had so
Mm-hmm.
many spiritual children, and they had like dozens of godchildren, and
That's
they would
great.
take children in when they were sick. Like, can you imagine if like one of your kids is sick and you're like you have a bunch of other kids and you just need help, they would like take the sick kid and help you with
Wow,
like, I
that's
know.
amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, can you imagine like volunteering to be that person? Like it's just a
Yeah.
beautiful witness. That I think is carried on by people who love Chesterton and know him. It's the
Mm-hmm.
spirit of this Christian hospitality that, like you said, it's little things. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to write a book. It's great if you can, but you don't have to. You don't have to host a conference, although we do, and you should sign up for it. Um, but you can just, have somebody over. There was a
Mm-hmm.
woman even in my town when I was growing up who her father was a tailor, and she's like, "Do you want to learn how to sew?" And she brought me over and
Wow,
taught me how to sew, and I still have like the little box she gave me of
that's
pins,
amazing.
and yeah, it's great. Um,
Right.
but yeah, we want to do these things, so we need to just sort of lean into them and make them part of our womanhood and part of our service, I think, in the
Yeah.
church and in the world.
Well, and I think the richer thing that happens too is just those relationships are then formed, but also just that in and out of being in people's lives and sort of seeing the way that they do deal with their relationships, the way they engage with their children. All of these
Mm.
things are, you can sort of pick the good with the bad. I remember being very young, and there was one woman who was like, I want to raise my children just the way that she has.
Mm.
And, I still think of her like, what would Mickey do? I mean, she's was really amazing,
Mm.
very maternal and conscientious woman. And so that, sort of helped form me in different small ways. But I love that idea of hospitality too, because, and this is what we talk about in Theology of Home is, you can't always get people to go to church with you, but you can get them into your home for a
Mm.
meal. People are usually not resistant to that kind of experience, especially if it's at a holiday, if they're by themselves, or um, a Sunday night dinner or something like that. And these are really basic things that you can do to pass on the faith in little ways, especially when they, with the witness of children and their faith, and those all those small things. And I know from my own experience too, those opportunities for hospitality, I always left those events feeling like I knew myself better. Like that was
Mhm.
sort of the weird thing about it. I felt like more who I was
Mm.
from those experiences, and felt seen and heard, and part of a bigger community. And that was really what I think made the impression upon me more immediately. It was, I just want more of that. There's
Mm.
something really special going on there, where it's not everybody just sitting in front of a television, but there's
Yeah.
actual real conversation and ideas, and conversation, and people can object and have debates and discussions, and then everybody has dessert. I mean, it's just, there's something very healthy about that dynamic, instead of it being political acrimony or
Mm.
all the drama that feels like we deal with in the public square today.
Yeah, or you go home and you can't talk about anything important, and that's sad too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's exactly right.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long. This has been really great. Do you have any like final thoughts? Anything you want to say here at the end?
Um, no, I mean, I think just, as far as the best thing that women can do is really start figuring out what it means to be a woman, to not,
Mm,
not be afraid of that question and not to be afraid of this idea of mothering. I think that the mothering others in these various ways that we've just obviously been talking about, I think, if we can raise our daughters this way with a sense of who they are instead of just constantly giving them the foil of you need to be in competition with men or become like men,
mm,
really embracing what it means to care for others and provide a place for them to become who they are and to, you know, nourish them and protect them. Those are really beautiful and vital things. And I think the more that we can embrace those elements in our own lives and the lives of our family and encourage them, then, it's just one step closer to something really healthy happening and building something instead of constantly tearing down,
mm.
the Judeo tradition that we've, the fumes of which we're sort of living off of now.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring it back.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. One last thing before we go, where can people find your books and your website and all these wonderful things?
So the blog is theologyofhome.com. And then I have a personal site that's got most of my articles and books called, it's just carriegress.com. But all the books can be purchased at Amazon and Catholic bookstores and that, wherever fine books are sold. They can be purchased.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I encourage everybody, men or women, to go out and find these books. They're great. And again, thank you so much. This has been really, really fun.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, wonderful. And thank you all for listening and being with us today. Please make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss one of these episodes. We're so blessed to have so many wonderful guests, and we want to share them with you because, as we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Thank you so much, and God bless.